Claire, I wonder if you might say a little more about autistic people who might come into contact with the criminal justice system as victims or as witnesses.
Yeah, certainly. So yes, so those that come into it not as a suspect or an offender might be as a victim or a witness. We have less information and less research about this than we do about those who come into contact with it as offenders, but it is building. We are getting there, and typically what it's focused on is sort of like witness testimony and the idea of a reliable witness, and whether the testimony will be considered reliable, whether they're the victim themselves or witness to another crime. And there's much of it has kind of focused on how sort of memory recall and those kinds of things, but obviously there's the wider aspect in terms of that how someone might communicate or talk about their experience might be different to what's expected, or even contrary to what's expected, so that can that can have a big impact as well on whether someone decides to take a case forward. So that's predominantly what it's focused on, but there's not been that much about the autistic experience of being a victim of crime, but actually we are getting more information about that now, and there's been some guidelines and some support resources developed for those who are supporting sort of autistic victims of crime. So it may be things like they need to be more familiar with an individual before they're willing to talk about what's happened to them, perhaps if they don't focus on the emotional experience, or perhaps talk about what you might expect someone to talk about. That doesn't mean they haven't experienced trauma or it wasn't frightening for them. It's just about learning how an autistic person might talk about it, and sort of interpreting that in a non-biased way, thinking well, they're not talking about it in this way, or they don't appear distressed, so it can't have been that bad. So so this is where a lot more work needs doing, because we're just starting to get that information coming through, and at the minute it's more sort of guidance rather than anything that's been researched and we can say that this works, but it is really good that it's starting, even if it is late.
So people's differences in communication might disadvantage them in the system?
Yes, that unfortunately there's no positive spin on it. Yes, that is the case. It might lead to them being disbelieved, or the idea of it being minimized, and that kind of thing. So absolutely, but like I say, we're now working to change that. So but again, hopefully with in the UK and other sort of countries and agencies thinking about, as we raise awareness about autism, that comes through as well. It's not just our own personal day-to-day interactions, but training in the police, training in the courts, training for counsellors, all the people that would come into contact and with them, and making sure in the same way that we're trying to ensure autistic offenders get fair support and trial and aren't disadvantaged, that the same is there for autistic witnesses and victims as well.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I wonder if you might just sum up what people have been thinking about and reflecting on in over this topic.
Yeah, sure. So hopefully this week this section, rather than just this week, you have been thinking about sort of autism in our wider social spheres. We've been talking about legislation, we've been talking about social policy, and how that sort of impacts in people's day-to-day lives. And one thing that we've spoken about is that we want you to think about how it impacts where you are in your country and your system and your society. And hopefully you'll have been able to note some good changes and good things that have happened, that and that there is progress, there is raising awareness, and there are changes, but also thinking about what you can do to implement those changes on a day-to-day basis. And then also, if you work in any organizations where you can make them on a larger scale, then do that too. You know, think about how you fit in within a social structure and how we can make social structures better for autistic people and their families, and in turn that will be better for everyone, I think.